Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi. James and I are so lucky to be with Alison Luterman today. And thank you so much, Alison, for taking time out to drop in and just talk with us a bit about poetry, writing, reading us some poems. We
My
want it all.
pleasure. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I love seeing the books too. I always like seeing books in the background.
This is just a fraction. So through this door is my bedroom, and there's like bookcases all over the bedroom, which I think for feng shui you're not supposed to have, but we have like a million books in our bedroom too. So
Well, books everywhere. What did Cicero
everywhere.
say? If you have a garden and a library, you have everything.
That is
He
true.
didn't say it couldn't be in the bedroom, you know.
Right.
He didn't specify.
There's like this leaning tower of Pisa of books on the table next to my bed with like 6 of them stacked up or 8 or something. And yeah, it's a little out of control.
Well, especially in earthquake country, we kind of go, I don't want to die this way, but
But on the other hand,
You gotta live. You gotta live, right?
so, so many of our participants I know are going to know your work through the Sun magazine, where you have such a strong presence, and I think it's a marker of the of your work that you write poems that people can step into, that bring them back to their daily lives in such a deep way. Is that an intention that you have as you're writing, or is that sort of how you happened to write? Could you talk about that?
Sure. I don't know if I would have articulated that intention way back whenever I started, which lost in the mists of time. But as I've gone along, many people have said to me, I don't usually like poetry, but I like your poetry because I can understand it. And at first I had mixed feelings about it because I was like, I want to get into the New Yorker and I want to get into Poetry Magazine and all those fancy places. And my stuff is too accessible. And that's the problem with it, why I'm not, in somebody else. It's that thing of where you always want to be somebody else.
Oh, it's a thing.
It's a thing. But
Right.
as I've gotten along, I've really come to appreciate that because we're not all having exalted experiences all the time, but we are having our car die in the parking lot of Trader Joe's, or stuff like that all the time, regular, ordinary stuff. And you may notice that a lot of my poems take place in grocery stores because I don't get out very much.
Alison, I have noticed that about my poems and
Really?
essays too. I'm like, another essay about a grocery store encounter,
That's where I socialize.
Great.
Cashiers at Trader Joe's, I know them all.
Yeah.
I know like where, their concerns, their kids, going to college, whatever. They want to go to firefighter school. I mean, we're like in it. And like, being a writer, you're in your study a lot, right?
Yeah, that's really true. You're alone a lot.
You're alone a lot. So going to the grocery store, I mean, I'm always volunteering for that job. Like, I'll go.
And I think during the pandemic, which we're still in that era, that becomes some of our main social contact. For a while, we couldn't really go to stores very readily. And then it becomes like, oh, wow, we get to go to the store. And it becomes a more sanctified experience, even than before, I think.
It's an encounter. I would say that my work is all about encounter, if there was one word. So it's encounter, but it doesn't have to be like, I mean, close encounters of the third time. It can be encountering a cashier at the grocery store, or encountering, a kid on the street, or encountering anybody, any two bodies or people or things.
Wow. I love that you said that. A note that I had to myself, because I make little notes, stick them in the book. We have your beautiful recent book here, In the Time of Great Fires. And was that your work is very relational. It's about relationship with partner, with self, with a friend. It's very with pets. And so at every turn, it's like, oh, encountering and relating.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd read us. I always want to get a poem in early in a conversation, but I wonder about braiding his hair.
I'd be happy to read that. I printed it out, so here it is. Braiding his hair. My husband used to have really long hair, like down to, really long. Here we are each morning, my husband on our old kitchen chair, its upholstery mended with duct tape, his head bent forward while I comb out his long, wheat-colored hair. Not what I thought we'd be doing in our 60s, me dividing the wet silk of it, still stubbornly reddish gold, only a little white at the sideburns. 3 thick hanks in hand, I begin to plait over, under, over, under. I don't remember when he stopped cutting his hair and decided to let it grow long as a girl's. And he was mistaken for a girl once, a tall, stoop-shouldered man girl, when he stood on the sidewalk, back turned, and a car drove by, honking and catcalling at him, not me. We laughed, but I had to wonder, when did his tresses, now halfway to his waist, first spill over his shoulders? It must have happened while we slept, as most things do. And how did he come to sit before me so patiently now, head bowed while I braid, as if he were the daughter I never had, and this my one chance to weave my care into each over, under, over, under.
So beautiful. I love that one.
Thank you.
I love it so much. And it's also my life. So I have to say that that's
Are you
part of
braiding your husband's hair also?
well, until I taught him to braid it. So now he does it, but he has this long hair that got very
Right.
long in the past few years. And I also don't have a daughter and had imagined braiding a daughter's hair. So it's so resonant. Oh,
Yeah.
now I'm braiding my husband's hair. And he taught our little niece to braid her hair when she was 10.
Wow.
And it was like all these unexpected manifestations of the braiding.
And that is a kind of braiding too. Like, yeah, my niece, who's now 18, when she was younger, she loved to play with my husband's hair. Like, she would make him sit in the chair and then she would just give him all these different hairstyles and take pictures of him. And because he loves her so much, he let her do it. She would be like 13 at the time. And
Yeah.
but the braiding of relationships, I guess, and the braiding of love and care, and it really doesn't matter. And I like the gender bending
Yes.
thing too, the gender flip.
That too. Yeah. We didn't expect that. My niece couldn't have expected she would learn that from her uncle. Right. So
Right.
there's
Right.
that there too. There's another resonance when you were doing that motion of braiding and talking about it. I remember being in conversation with the poet Naomi Shihab Nye, and I'd been looking at her work closely, beforehand. And I kept seeing words like braid, bread, tea, mother. And as I dropped into it, I said to her, these are timeless words. In any era and any century, we can reference bread, braid, tea.
Right.
And so when you talk about, oh, my work is so regular, I think that's an anxiety many of us have, like, oh, it's so relatable. But don't we want to encounter and relate?
Yeah. Well, it's precious. I mean, you realize how precious the ordinary is when it gets ripped away, when you lose somebody, and people who have lost their spouses say that the thing they miss the most are just the regular moments, not the highlights when you went on, vacation to
honeymoon thing,
exotic, but just the, sitting around together and watching Netflix in the evening or drinking coffee together in the morning or whatever, those very mundane, ordinary moments that you get over and over and over again until one day you don't. And so those are incalculably precious, even though we often do take them for granted.
Yeah. I think that's well said.
And I love your word too, encounters, because it can be with a stranger out in the world, the cashier at Trader Joe's, but we have encounters with our loved ones too. You know, there are just these moments of connection. Danusha has called them moments of exchange in her poem, Small Kindnesses. And I love that idea. It's really changing the way I think about not just your work, but just, you know, the kinds of poems that I want to write in general, that these encounters, there's something special. There's something more than just this passing experience of interaction that we have. It's something fuller than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where it's all happening in the everyday. And in a way, when we write, we're able to salvage some of that, maybe.
To catch
Hold
some
on
of
to
it,
it.
yeah, because it's fleeting, you know, and the older I get, the faster it goes, which everybody says is true, but it is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My history teacher in the 6th grade told me that, Liz Green. I used to carpool with her sometimes, and she said, when she was from New York, this really wonderful, like the old school New York accent. But she told me, when you get older, this is going to happen. Everything's going to speed up and speed up. And I was like, but why? What does that mean? I just couldn't imagine it. And now I'm like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. It's really the way it goes. I have a note on another poem I'd love to hear you read, and then we can let you do your own choice of poem too at some point.
No, I'm totally happy to take requests.
Oh, okay. I always feel kind of bossy when I'm like, do this.
Boss away, boss me around. I love it. I don't have to like think. That's good.
Yeah.
That's right.
We're thinking about this old school. Let's see. I think it was the poem "The Debate."
Oh yeah. That's
on page 85 of your book.
Yeah, that's my dad and my uncle, who are both still. I mean, that poem I wrote a few years ago, and I'm about to celebrate my father's 88th birthday with him. So I'm going to go to Massachusetts to see him for that. Yeah, and my uncle is 3 years younger than him. So The Debate. I'm listening to my father and his brother, both in their 80s, debate their shared childhood from adjoining lazy boy recliners. We had no toys, my father insists. What are you talking about, no toys? My uncle practically leaps from his chair, except he can't on account of his back and his legs and his feet and his hips. We had tons of toys. Then he lists them. The playing cards, those don't count, my father says. The train set. Oh yeah, I forgot about the train set. The sleds. Did anyone else on our block have sleds? Uncle Barry asks. 1940, men are crawling out of the Great Depression on hands and knees. Tell me, did anyone on our block besides us have a sled? My grandfather had a good job delivering newspapers and brought home $65 a week, enough for a Chinese restaurant every Friday and cupcakes on birthdays. We really didn't have birthday parties, my father contends, and my uncle lunges at this. What are you talking about? What about the surprise party they gave you when you turned 13? That was the only time, my father counters equably. Don't even try, Uncle Barry, I almost say, then catch myself. I want this unwinnable argument to continue forever, if possible. I want parry and thrust, the Brooklyn music of their voices entwined in a duet with no resolution. I want the song, half lament, half exaltation, to go on and on and on.
Oh, wow. You capture that moment so well. I mean, you're performing it really well too.
Yeah.
But I think we can hear your father and uncle in that argument. It's so universal, you know, the kind of two old men arguing.
Yes. It's so good.
They're
It's
hilarious.
archetypal. This is an archetypal moment. And then
right.
this thing of, we had no birthday parties. What are you talking about? You know, and to forget the toy train. And this is what happens in families, right?
Yes.
Everybody remembers things totally differently.
Right.
There's no possibility of consensus.
Yeah.
I have read that poem at poetry readings. I've had Black people, Chinese people, people of every culture, come up to me afterwards and say, that's my family. Those are my uncles. or
Those are
my
my
mother
uncles.
and her sister. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Everybody remembers
yeah.
one way. Oh, that's so much fun. And then that turn that you get to toward the end makes it actually really poignant for me. I felt that when it goes toward, no, I stopped myself. I want this unwinnable argument to continue forever, if possible, because we know it's not.
Right.
Right. And that's where each happiness ringed by lions, like, oh, I'm loving this. Even though it's an argument, I'm loving it.
I was actually trying to capture it with my phone, like video it, but because I'm so technically incompetent, I thought I was videoing it, and for my cousins and my siblings, I thought everybody would get a kick out of it, but I didn't, because I'm really lame with technology. So then I had to write the poem because the video had failed. My attempt to video it had failed.
I'm really glad your video failed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This is such a delight.
So I was going to ask you, Alison, I think this is good for our participants to hear, just this idea that you're using material from everyday life,
Right.
For your work. When do you sit down to write something like that? Like, is it the day after when you really want to capture it? Or does it just bubble up from memory and you're like, oh yeah, I really want to capture
Both.
that?
There's
Yeah.
times when it happens in the moment and I'm able to, I mean, it really depends on like when I get a moment and, and the spaciousness, which is feeling kind of hard to come by these days, frankly. My life has gotten pretty full in a good way, but it's harder to find that space because I think I don't remember as the honest response. Like, I don't remember that particular poem, how long it took between the event and capturing it. I can tell you that ending and the turn that Danusha was just talking about took me a long time to get right.
Yeah.
I had an ending that didn't quite work, and I knew that the body of the poem was working and was good, but I couldn't quite find the hinge and I couldn't quite find the ending. And I worked on that sucker for a long, long time, many drafts. And it's hard for me to be simple, and it needed to be simple and stripped down. I had to kind of I had all this extra stuff. I don't even remember what it was, but I was trying to get fancy with it, and it didn't want to be fancy. But it took me a long time to see that.
I love how you talk about it as a hinge. It's like this,
Turn,
we're tinkering with this almost like an engine or a machine, and it has to work. We know when it doesn't work.
Yeah, I had to kind of land it, and the endings are challenging for me a lot. That's where I spent a lot of time and a lot of drafts trying to get that part.
That's the trickiest thing, I think, because that's where we want something else to happen.
Right.
Something that hasn't happened yet, but we don't know what.
Yeah, and you can't push the exaltation. That's been a thing that I do sometimes, is to try and and now the lotus is going to come out of the mud, right? This is the enlightenment moment, and then and I pour too much on that, and it's like no, it has to be kind of simple. It has to be earned. It has to be authentic to what came before. You can't just create like the moment of trumpets and and major chord and the godlight coming through. Like, you have to like let it build to what let it be what it is.
Yeah,
hard.
That is hard because and I think we know, like, the way I know when I've done that is it hasn't changed me. I've performed an ending that I can get away with, and I could maybe get published somewhere. I've performed it, but when I check in with myself, like, did I change, or did my relationship to this moment change? Have I somehow changed from writing this? And if I'm like, no, it's like, oh, still in the trenches.
I love that word, performing and ending. That's perfect. That's exactly right. Yes, because when you've been doing this for a while, as we all have, you get to the point where you can perform a turn.
Right.
But it's not the deepest turn that you could get, and it's not at that, and you know that some part of you knows that, even though some other part of you is like, well, I could get away with this. This is pretty good. This is good enough.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next thing.
Right. It feels good to be clever. And when we've been doing it long enough, we can be clever. And it's sort of, yay, I did it. But did I?
Right.
And it's so hard to keep tinkering with it and working at it, because when you get into that productivity mindset, it's like, I just want to move on to the next thing. I want to lay this aside. But I've noticed, and I think this is talking a lot with Danusha, who talks about being an incrementalist and working at it little by little. It's always worth it when you get to that. I think of it as a surprise. Like, even if I'm like you, Alison, I usually pour it on at the end, and it's like stripping back. So the surprise is like, really? Can I just leave it that simple? And people will get it,
Right. And that's enough? Is that enough?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that enough? I know one of my early teachers and still a friend is Dorian Lux, and wonderful poet. But when I first showed her my stack of poems as I was working toward a first book, she just cut off the endings of a bunch of poems, and it was sort of a massacre. But it really was one of the most helpful things that anyone's done for me, because you don't want to go on too long and like keep hammering that nail. And so now I'm there. I warned my students, I'm like, I'm going to do a thing.
It's going to hurt, but in the end, you'll be glad.
That's right. It's a good surgery. It's a good surgery.
Someday.
You're going to just pull out a little scalpel. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But
I do that too, because I don't, it's trusting the reader, trusting that they will get it if you say it once in a simple, subtle way, rather than, proclaiming it 5 times in a very fancy way.
Yeah. Well, no wonder we do that, because so much of life is trying to be understood. And so often we're not, or we don't feel that we are. There's so much misunderstanding. So it makes sense that when we turn to writing, we're like, this is what I'm trying to say, people.
Yeah. And if it's a value, like you were saying, Alison, with your work, when you realized that it was accessible and that you wanted to encourage that was a good thing. If that's a value for you, then it can be easy to like really like, let me go 5 lines or more extra just to be sure that people are actually understanding it, I always think of Stephen Dunn said something like, we will be known for the delicacy of where we stop short.
Ooh, I like that. I never heard that before. That's great.
I'll write that down. Can you say it again, James?
Sure. And I'm hoping I'm getting it right. That it was Stephen Dunn. I could have made that up, but I think it's true. And it is, we will be known for the delicacy of where we stop short.
Wow.
And so it's this idea that it's kind of stopping short and that being enough, like we were saying. And so that's like my ongoing learning journey as a writer.
Me too.
It's all ongoing, isn't it? I love having those kind of quotes to store away, but that's something I like to tell writers too, is that it never ends. As long as we are compos mentis, as long as whatever we've got here is somewhat engaged, we can keep going down all these different rabbit holes of different ways of writing or reading, discovering new writers. There's just so much more all the time. There's no end to it. And as we're catching up, people are writing more and more to catch up with.
I know.
It's crazy. But I think that for me, that's a lot of the joy of it, is I'm forever in 5th grade going, oh, and now what? What's the new lesson? What else is there? Right.
It's true. It's true. It's nice to be engaged in something that you can never really conquer. You never get it. You just sort of keep going.
You never get it. You just sort of keep going.
Frustrating and wonderful at the same time.
Yeah. You can't really master it, whatever that means.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes against like what we're, I think, often trained in our culture, that there's some easy fix or there's a formula, which I would
Right,
love if there was just a formula
right.
for every poem to really work. And it is so far from the truth. It just is
Yeah.
not possible.
And if you try to use the strategy that worked on your last poem on the poem that you're currently working on, it's like, why are you even working on this new poem? Because you already did
Yeah.
that. So you have to find something else to do.
Oh
Mm.
my gosh. What have we
That's a
gotten
good,
ourselves into?
that's a good message
I
though.
know. Too late
Torture,
now.
just self-torture,
Right.
essentially. But the best kind. I mean, it's really like challenging ourselves. I think people who become writers, and I think especially poets, are people who like to have their minds really stretched and challenged. And
Yeah, although me, I'm just in it for the money, really.
Oh,
right,
of
well,
course.
yeah,
We figured as much. Us too.
I was going
Right.
to ask for an invite to your lake house, Alison.
It's coming in the mail.
Okay, good. I'll be waiting.
Yeah, don't hold your breath though.
Yeah.
Well, how about another poem, but if you're choosing?
Oh, of my choosing. Okay.
Sure.
Well, I'll read Jump because that's the one that
Yeah.
was just out in the sun.
Okay.
Yeah, here it is. So it's out this month actually. And I have since gotten a new car, so don't worry about me. My car, well, it's a new used car, but it actually does start all the time, which is my favorite thing about
That's
a
a
car.
blessing.
It's a really good thing. This is called Jump. Because my car is 20 years old and the gizmo that goes ding, ding, ding when you leave the lights on has been busted for at least a decade, I'm always contending with a comatose battery, always approaching strangers to ask for a jump in Trader Joe's parking lot or on a deserted street in the growing dark, where a man in a python green Porsche affixes the red and black alligator clamps confidently yet incorrectly, killing the thing altogether, resulting in a 10 p.m. call to AAA, an hours-long wait at a 7-Eleven, and a midnight ride sitting in the cab of a tow truck whose driver has just been dumped by his wife of 11 years and desperately needs to talk about it. These are the adventures you may have if you tend to leave your lights on, as I do, at dusk when the light is tricky, the hour entre chien et loup, between dog and wolf, as the French call it, when the distracted mind is too full of shadows to remember what the hand did just moments ago. By now, I'm an old pro at setting up cables, fitting black to minus, red to plus, but I'll never get over the small miracle of how fast it all works, the spark arcing quicker than thought, as soon as a benefactor turns their ignition switch. My own car springing to life again, like Sleeping Beauty after just the right kiss. The way a smile will ricochet from a stranger's face to my own, or one kind word retrieve a flailing soul from the abyss.
Wow, the way that opens up in the end. I mean, talk about a hinge, right? It's just throw the door
Wide
wide
open.
open. And you begin with such seemingly humble material, the hours-long wait in the 7-Eleven, grocery store parking lots, a car that won't start.
From the not the ridiculous to the sublime, but from the very ordinary.
Very mundane.
Very
But my life is,
mundane.
my life is very ordinary. I mean, I
Mhm.
teach classes and I write and I go to the grocery store and I
Yeah.
take walks with my friends and, go to the movies but I'm not like having great adventures all the time. And when I do have great adventures, they don't always make it into my poems. Like I went to Africa with Kim Rosen a couple of years ago. It was amazing. I went to Kenya. We had all kinds of incredible encounters. And I've written one poem about it that hasn't really worked. I mean, you won't see that poem because I didn't think I couldn't quite get it to work. It was like, I loved it. I saw a giraffe. A giraffe was living in an acacia bush like 10 feet away from me. It was amazing.
Oh,
I met, incredible people. All this stuff, but somehow it's not in the poems. And somehow I'm in the grocery store at Trader Joe's in Oakland in my poems.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you are, many of your poems, at least in my sort of mental cataloging, fall under Bard of the Everyday, the person who sings of the daily.
mm,
And that's one of the ways of writing that I think we lean into the most, because most of us are having our car stall somewhere and picking up groceries or dropping kids off at school or whatever it is.
mhm.
My car did break down at Andronico's, which is in your town, within the past year, and I had to have it towed. And
Right.
luckily there was some warranty stuff going on, but it's like that's what we're
That's-
dealing in
That's most of life.
most
Mhm.
of
And you,
life.
and you get these other cool things, and adventures and all that. But yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the sublime is almost too much for us sometimes, because we're not rooted and centered in our lives when it's happening to us. So it's difficult to really
Mm,
absorb it. It takes more time. Like
yeah.
years ago, my husband and I went to New Zealand, and it was this huge adventure, amazing place. The plane ride was its own adventure because it was so incredibly long. But I don't have a single poem that I've written about that time that actually worked, as you said. I wrote a lot while I was there, but it just nothing really coalesced.
Right.
That's so fascinating. I'm going to have
Yeah.
to sit with this and see if I'm the same way. I might be. When
Yes.
extraordinary things happen, we sort of don't know what to do with them in a way.
Mhm.
As you said, James, the sublime is too much for us.
Maybe I'm just too sensitive. I don't know, but it's almost too much. And so I say to people, just save the money you would spend on airline tickets. Just go to the grocery store. Plenty there.
So much is going down. I do have some grocery store poems too. So much happens at the grocery store. And I'm thinking of a well-known one by Kim Adenizio. I can't remember the title of it, but she's looking at the face of the checker and sort of
Mhm.
realizing how everything is connected. Maybe it's interconnectivity. Does it have some crazy title like that? I'll look it up. But
I love her work. I'm writing this down. I'll look it up.
I think it's in Tell Me, the book.
Okay. I've got that book. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some poem about the grocery checker. That's a great prompt actually for anybody who ends up watching this, that, what about the grocery store? What
Mhm.
grocery store or stores do you go to? What happens when you go there? Who works there?
Mhm.
What is some of the usual or unusual stuff that goes down while
Yeah.
getting groceries? That's a
True.
lot of material, strangely.
It
It's a great
is.
prompt.
I have that poem, I Confess, about stalking the woman with white braids in the grocery store.
And again,
Yeah.
braids.
And again, braids. Yeah. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah.
When you were saying earlier about braids and bread, of course, being Jewish, I was thinking about braided bread.
Oh, like
Yeah.
challah. Yeah. Yeah, there's something very primal, primary, ancient about braids, bread, the flour, the bowl. There's just things, and it's interesting to think about when we're writing, what are the timeless things that we also still use? We've got our little iPhones or whatever we've got, but we're still mixing in a mixing bowl. There's technology that doesn't change.
It's the tactile also that's so precious, because like many people, I spend a lot of my life just looking at this little box that we're all looking in right now, and with my hands on the keyboard and not really using them so I think any opportunity I have to use my body, and especially my hands, in some way that's not a computer thing, is a precious opportunity for poetry, whether it's just pulling up the old dead tomato plants in my garden, which I need to do, and that stuff, picking up squashed figs off the sidewalk.
Mm.
All I need to do, and I will do after we get off the call. And
Mm.
those are my plans for the day.
I like knowing something about your plans.
Yes. Well, we have this big fig tree and it's dropping all its fruit on the sidewalk. And so every day I have to go out and pick up the squashed figs from the sidewalk so nobody breaks their neck and sues us. So that's
Right.
one of my big plans for today.
That's a motivating factor, the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Have you written about that fig tree?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
That
Okay.
picture is in Desire Zoo. Yeah,
Yeah, it just I could just hear a poem in it when you were talking about it.
it's
So,
totally a poem. It's so messy. Yeah, I don't know if I can pull up the poem.
ooh, but
Um,
maybe not.
I'm not sure. I think it would take me a minute, and I'm happy to do it if you can edit this, but it might take me a second.
I think we are very
If you're relaxed.
unskilled
We're very
editors, but we're
relaxed.
relaxed. So that's what we can do. We can't edit,
Yeah.
but we can relax.
All right,
Well,
let me see if I can find it.
And in the meantime, too, I was just thinking that's such a great prompt, like describing one of these times where you really used your body or you used one of those
Mhm.
kind of elemental tools and just really getting in touch with the tactile nature of it.
Yes. I think that we don't have enough of that. We're kind of hungry for it in
Yeah.
our overly digital world where we're all kind of in the same boat with that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I'm writing down rake, bowl, shovel.
Yeah.
Mix.
okay, I found the poem. Would you like me to read it?
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be
It's
great.
called Fig Tree. Offering herself to strangers, her ripe purple ova, her sweet sacks of seeds, soft for the squeezing and tasting. Somebody tell her not to do that. Rolled all over the sidewalk for any dog walker to finger. Any old lady hobbling by on her walker gets one, or homeless guy settling in for a smoke, or surreptitious single mother with her plastic bags and her army of climbing kids. Not very ladylike, crotch open for a sneakered foot, a panting embrace, and all that black honey oozing. See how her heart's left smashed on the sidewalk for feral cats to sniff, her intimate goo underfoot, pecked by pigeons, swarmed with ants. Should have pruned her harder, brought her up short before she showed her desire so freely, upraised arms opening to sky, profligate branches that could poke somebody's eye out. Such crazy need to feed the world.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
wow.
That's my fig tree.
Oh, gosh.
Promiscuous fig. I love
Yeah.
She's
that.
promiscuous. And it's like having a pet that you have to pick up. When dogs, you have to pick up their mess.
All
With a
right.
fig tree, you have to pick up its mess like all the time. If you have a fruit tree in the city, that's part of the deal.
That's
Yeah.
part of the
Right.
deal. And I love that it becomes personified in that way. This fig is just sort of giving so much. And then it's sort of like, oh my God, how is she doing that? Should she be doing that? There's something about that that's very Edenic. And
She's embodying the feminine principle, which when you were talking about Naomi and her work a few moments ago, and the bread and the braids and I was thinking, well, it's feminine, she's singing the feminine. I mean, I know that we can get in trouble being essentialist about those terms, feminine and masculine, but it's the earthy, the humble, the essential, the things you need to sustain life. That those images recur over and over in her work. And I'm a huge fan of Naomi's work. And the fig tree to me is embodying the feminine, and it's wild too. It can't be tamed, can't be pruned, can't stop.
Right.
The sexuality of it is,
there.
you can't, trim it and fence it. I mean, we trim it back all the time and it just comes back more. The more you cut her back, the more she's coming out.
That's such a great metaphor, though.
So
Yeah.
great.
I love that.
Feminine.
I love
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you said the earthy, the humble, and the essential. It's like, well, rather than the lofty, and then both things exist, right? The lofty, the intellectual, that realm of ideas and principles and all that lives over here. And then over here is just, how do we get through the day? Food, bowl, oven, fire, all of those things. So we have those two realms. And that's interesting as writers to be aware of those realms so that we can draw from either of them consciously? Am I going into the realm of theory and idea, or am I drawing from the realm of the daily? Where am I drawing from?
Well, I think it's the marriage of those things, because even if I look like, and I'm using simple language and I'm using simple imagery, as is Naomi Shihab Nye, her
Right.
sentences are simple,
But
but deceptively, but the thoughts behind them are very profound, and there is, so it's not as simple as it looks.
No, it's not. And when Naomi chose my first book and she helped me with some edits on it, and it's like her craft stuff was so precise and right on. It's like she's a technician. She 100% is alert and to all of that and highly aware of it, but doing so in a way that looks just effortless.
Right. It doesn't show the, but there is that guiding intelligence and the crafting. So it's not just your journal, and, and people would be surprised to know how many drafts a seemingly simple poem of mine anyway goes through, because it's not natural for me to be simple. I have crazy complicated ideas all the time. And so for me to get simple takes a lot of drafts, a lot of work to get there. I always think it's like ballet dancers who are doing so much work behind the scenes to look just sort of like they're floating.
They're just floating. Oh my God, how amazing. But having studied it as a girl for 7 years and bled in those shoes, I know what it's like, as many of us know, behind the scenes.
What I always tell my students is I quote Dolly Parton. She says,
love
it takes a lot of money to look this cheap.
That's great.
I say it takes a lot of drafts to sound simple. It takes a lot of work to say something simple.
And there's so much craft too in the sound and the music of your language. I really feel the attention behind that in your work. And I just noticed in that we were talking about a tactile experience, and just all these P sounds, like, like your whole mouth is involved in that poem. It's really, it's living in the body, just as the fig tree is alive in her body too.
Living in the body. Maybe that's what we'll call this little segment.
I love it.
Living in the body, because that's really what it is so much about, Alison, in your work. And it brings us to, reading it. Back to the body, back to this moment, and what can I write about that? Like, I'm looking at the plum tree outside my window. What can I say about that? But it's just so nice to come back to where we are. That's a gift.
Well, and even if I were, I wish I could travel more. I have travel envy, but I have Facebook envy all the time. I look on Facebook, people are going all these amazing places. But wherever you go, you're living in your body. If you're in Portugal or China or the most amazing place in the world, you're still in your body wherever you go. Yes. So that's the thing.
It's a very equalizing thing in so many ways. I always think no matter how rich you are, how famous, or how extraordinary your life is, you're just living in a body. And that's a challenging place to be, and more so for some of us, or at some stages than others.
For sure.
It's a thing, and it's unpredictable, and it's sometimes painful physically. We're just living in our bodies.
Yeah, very humbling.
Very humbling.
I have a friend who says you take you with you wherever you go.
Yeah, you do. And we've all had the experience of being somewhere like on vacation, and we should be having a great time because we're in paradise. I remember being in Hawaii and I was having a miserable time and feeling like doubly bad because, it's like I'm in paradise, but, I'm miserable because I'm having a fight with the guy that I went with that I shouldn't have been with. That, it's like.
Right. That'll take it down. Yeah. Wrong person, mosquitoes, also not a fan of cockroaches. When I've been in Barbados, where my mother's from, cockroaches.
Yeah, big ones.
So big, and not something we have here. Yeah. We don't have that in California, at least not that I encounter. So, there's always something. There's always, I wrote in a poem, there's always something itching beneath the surface. But sometimes it's above the surface. It's great to be able to capture that. And we're so lucky to get to talk to you today like this. You've been really generous with your time
Thank
and
you.
your talents and your humor. And just, I feel, well, it's just nice when we have a conversation that makes me want to, pick up my notebook and
Oh, good. I'm glad. I've really enjoyed just talking to you. It's fun to get to hang out with you too.
you
Yeah, me
too.
too.
And I
Um,
hope we'll do more things together because I really enjoy this. And I know that this is going to be really well received. So
Oh, good. I hope so. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison.